The morning they escorted me out, the server room was running perfectly. Every database hummed. Every scheduled script was queued. Every payroll file for 12,000 construction workers across 4 states was aligned and ready to process. The cooling fans held their steady rhythm. That low mechanical breath I had listened to every morning for 8 years. I knew that sound the way a pilot knows his engines. I knew when it was healthy, and I knew when something was about to go wrong. That morning, everything sounded exactly right. By Friday, it would all be silence. My name is Brian Thompson. I am 48 years old. I have spent the better part of a decade as the senior database administrator for Southwest Building Materials, one of the largest construction supply and contracting companies in the American Southwest. We operate across Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. At any given time, we have active crews on highway projects, high-rise builds, industrial sites, and government contracts. And every single Friday, without exception, every one of those workers needs to get paid. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. Not glamorous work. No one writes headlines about the man in the server room. No one invites the database administrator to the ribbon-cutting ceremonies or the shareholder lunches. But when 12,000 workers wake up on Friday morning and the money is sitting in their accounts, that is because someone spent the night before making sure the system did not fail them. Someone checked the wage classifications. Someone verified the tax exports. Someone caught the duplicate time entries from the Phoenix warehouse clock that started glitching after 11 at night whenever network traffic ran high. Someone rebuilt the Arizona prevailing wage calculation engine from scratch when the state updated its rules in the middle of a busy season. That someone was me. I am not telling you this to sound important. I am telling you this so you understand what was at stake when the new vice president walked in with his daughter. His ambition. And absolutely no idea what he was about to destroy. Andrew Rodriguez arrived 3 months before everything fell apart. His father was the chairman of Rodriguez Family Holdings, the private equity group that had just acquired Southwest Building Materials. Andrew came in as VP of Operations, which in practice meant he walked job sites in tailored suits, sat in on budget meetings with a lot of opinions, and talked about agility and cost optimization like he had memorized a business school vocabulary list. He was in his mid-30s, well-groomed, well-connected, and completely unbothered by the things he did not understand. That kind of confidence is dangerous in any industry. In construction and payroll, it is catastrophic. He had been in the building about 6 weeks before he started looking at the IT budget the way a man looks at a crowded parking lot, deciding whose car to have towed. I was the obvious target. Senior salary, legacy systems, long tenure. In the language of cost-cutting, those 3 things add up to one word: expensive. What Andrew could not see from his spreadsheets was that expensive and irreplaceable are sometimes the same thing. I found out on a Monday morning. Patricia Williams from HR called me into Andrew's office with the kind of warm professional smile that means the news is not warm and it is not professional. Andrew was seated behind a glass desk that still smelled faintly of the packaging it had shipped in. He was scrolling his tablet without looking up. The universal executive signal for, "I have already made this decision, and your presence here is a formality." Patricia stood near the window, with her arms folded. That specific HR posture that means I do not agree with this, but I am not going to say so out loud. And then there was Ashley. She was standing near the whiteboard in a business suit that probably cost more than some of our foremen earned in 2 weeks. She had her iPad out. She had her notebook ready. And she had the particular expression of someone who has been told their whole life that competence is something you project rather than something you prove. Andrew's daughter, fresh out of business school, armed with a full-color presentation about modern payroll solutions, no relevant experience, no prior knowledge of our systems, no understanding of construction labor law, multi-state wage compliance, union contract requirements, or any of the dozen other technical and legal frameworks that kept our payroll out of federal court. But she had a spreadsheet. Andrew finally put down his tablet. "Brian," he said, "we are restructuring IT. moving to a more agile, cost-effective model. Then he added, with the specific casualness of a man who does not feel bad about what he is saying. No offense, but we cannot keep paying premium money for a system only one guy understands. I want to tell you I did not feel anything in that moment, but that would not be true. 8 years. I had given that company 8 years of late nights, emergency calls, holiday shifts, and genuine professional pride. When the Arizona wage database started returning bad county codes, I caught it on a Saturday afternoon and fixed it before anyone's paycheck was affected. When a federal contractor audited us and questioned our overtime documentation, I stayed in that server room for 36 hours straight and produced records so clean, the auditor actually apologized for the inconvenience. When Hurricane Harvey disrupted operations across our Texas sites and half the timekeeping infrastructure went down, I rerouted the entire payroll process through a backup system I had quietly built 2 years earlier because I believed in redundancy. I believed in being prepared. No one put a plaque on my wall for any of it. They did not need to. The workers got paid. That was the point. And now Andrew Rodriguez was explaining to me that the system only one guy understood was actually a liability. Patricia offered a careful smile. We will need you to help Ashley with documentation for a smooth transition. Ashley looked up from her iPad. I have reviewed your processes, she said. Very thorough. But I think there is room for a more streamlined approach. Streamlined. I looked at her spreadsheet on the wall screen behind her. Clean columns, color-coded categories, pivot tables, conditional formatting, macros with friendly little names. It looked like a business school project. It looked like someone had solved payroll, the way someone solves a word problem on a test. Neat. Orderly. Completely disconnected from reality. I tried. I want you to know I genuinely tried. Arizona alone has hundreds of wage classifications. I said. Some vary by county. Some depend on whether a federal contract touches the project. If we use the wrong classification, we are not off by a few cents. We could underpay entire crews and not catch it until a union rep pulls our records. Ashley nodded in the specific way people nod when they have already decided not to absorb what you are saying. I have lookup tables for that, she said. Lookup tables. For a moment. I sat very still. I thought about the men who had called me over the years. The foreman from El Paso, who rang at midnight because a time clock glitch had doubled his crew's deductions. The welder from Denver who quietly asked me to double-check his direct deposit because his landlord had already called twice. The young concrete worker in Phoenix, barely 22, who had asked me once, in a low voice that he was clearly embarrassed to use, whether the system could confirm his child support payment had gone through, because the court date was in 2 days. I thought about all of them, and I thought about how none of them would ever appear in Ashley's lookup tables. But Andrew had already made the decision. I could see it in the way he was checking his phone. The meeting was a performance. The outcome had been decided before I walked through the door. So I said the only thing left to say. I will document everything I can. Ashley smiled, relieved that I was cooperating. I did not smile back, because I already knew what she did not. You can document procedures. You can print manuals. You can write step-by-step instructions until your fingers ache. But you cannot teach someone the difference between a system they understand and a system they think they understand. And you cannot protect 12,000 families from the consequence of that confusion. What came next was 3 of the most uncomfortable days of my professional life. Ashley shadowed me Tuesday, Wednesday, and most of Thursday. I want to be fair to her here. She was not lazy. She worked hard. She took notes constantly and asked follow-up questions and stayed late. The problem was not effort. The problem was the gap between what she was learning and what she thought she was learning. Every time I described a complexity, she tried to reduce it to a formula. When I explained that the Phoenix warehouse time clock sometimes logged duplicate entries on high-network nights and that those duplicates had to be reviewed manually before processing, she wrote in her notebook, "Filter duplicates automatically." When I walked her through the union meal penalty rule that only triggered under very specific crew schedule conditions, she frowned at the contract clause like it was a personal insult and typed "simplify" with conditional formatting. When I showed her the federal prevailing wage audit trail we maintained for government contracts and explained that the documentation had to be granular enough to survive an inspector's review, she said it looked like something we could probably automate. I set my coffee down and breathed slowly. Automating something you understand is efficiency. Automating something you do not understand is how you turn a controlled system into a controlled disaster. By Thursday afternoon, she was confident enough to run a live test. She imported real data from 47 job sites, 12,000 employee records, thousands of time entries spanning multiple tax jurisdictions, inentier, hazard pay classifications, federal contract flags, and overtime layers. She hit import, and I watched her laptop begin to struggle under the weight of it. The fans on her machine screamed. Cells loaded in the wrong order. Error flags appeared. A warning about circular references popped up, and she dismissed it before finishing the message. I watched her color-coded columns start to contradict each other. The tax summary displayed negative withholding on one crew. Another crew showed impossible overtime hours. A third crew had a calculated net pay that was larger than their gross. "It is just processing," she said. Her voice had changed. The smooth MBA confidence had developed a hairline fracture. I could hear the uncertainty in it. The way you hear a car engine that sounds mostly fine but has something subtly, dangerously wrong. "Ashley," I said quietly, "you should test this on a smaller dataset. 20 records. Verify manually. Then scale up." She looked at me for just a moment too long. Then she looked back at the screen and kept clicking. I gave her one final warning before I left Thursday evening. "When something goes wrong tomorrow," I said, and I used the word when deliberately. Not if. Do not keep rerunning the calculations. Every rerun risks creating duplicate entries. Find the root cause first. Fix it, then process again. She thanked me. She looked tired. She also looked like someone who still believed she had everything under control. I picked up my coffee mug, my framed photo, and the bottle of bourbon I kept in my bottom drawer for genuine emergencies. Patricia walked me to the security desk. Eddie Morrison, our security manager, was waiting with the paperwork. Eddie was a former Marine, the kind of man who said little but noticed everything. He looked at me and then looked toward the office. "This does not feel right." "Brian?" he said. "No," I said, signing the last page. "It does not." I drove home. I made dinner. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat on my porch and watched the sun go down over the desert. And I thought about Friday morning and the 12,000 people who had no idea what was about to happen to their paychecks. I slept poorly. My phone started at 10:30. The first message was from Kevin Martinez in payroll support. It said, "Brian, Ashley's report is showing me working negative overtime. Is that even a real thing?" I set the phone down. It buzzed again. Danny Walsh in Phoenix, Brian. My pay stub says I earn $847 an hour. I am a concrete finisher. I am flattered, but something is wrong. Then another, then 20 more in the space of 5 minutes. I did not need to log into the system to understand what had happened. I had watched it build toward this for 3 days. Ashley's import had mixed up the column mapping. The spreadsheet was reading employee identification numbers as hours worked, reading hours worked as wage rates, and reading wage rates as tax codes. Excel was not calculating payroll. It was generating financial nonsense and presenting it in clean, color-coded columns. Crane operators were listed as general laborers. Concrete crews had been assigned executive overtime classifications. Some workers were showing hours that exceeded the number of hours in the week. One foreman in El Paso sent me a message that said, My pay stub says I worked 2,847 hours last week and my net pay is negative $12,000. Did I steal from the company? Or did the company steal from me? I almost laughed. But then I looked at my clock. 11:45. The bank cutoff for direct deposit was noon. There was no version of this story where Ashley fixed the problem in 15 minutes. The file going to the bank was wrong at a structural level. Not one bad cell. Not one incorrect formula. The entire column logic was inverted. Fixing it was not a matter of catching an error. It was a matter of rebuilding the entire import from scratch, revalidating every record, and regenerating the file in a format the bank could actually read. That was 6 hours of careful work minimum. And that was if someone who knew the system was doing it. At noon, the bank rejected everything. The direct deposit file bounced back with error codes that read like a list of disasters. Invalid amounts. Invalid account references. Calculation values that had triggered automatic fraud flags. The bank system did not process it. Did not partially process it. Did not flag it for manual review. It rejected the whole file and sent it back. 12,000 employees opened the payroll portal and found nothing. Or worse. Some found entries that made no sense. Some saw their names paired with someone else's hours. Some saw deductions that were larger than their gross pay. Some saw hourly rates that belonged to supervisors they had never met. And construction workers, unlike office staff, do not wait quietly for an explanation. By 1 o'clock, the message chains had started. Group texts among crew members turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into conversations at job sites. Conversations at job sites turned into foremen making announcements over radios. And the announcements were simple and direct. No one had been paid. At 2 o'clock, Jim Patterson climbed onto the back of a pickup truck outside our main office with a bullhorn. Jim had been a construction foreman for 25 years. He was not a man given to theatrics. He was the kind of foreman who settled disputes quietly, protected his crew fiercely, and expected a company to honor its obligations the way he honored his. He was done being quiet. Southwest Building Materials thinks they can play games with our paychecks. His voice carried across the parking lot. If they cannot pay us, maybe we should not work for them. Phoenix sites went quiet within the hour. Then Albuquerque. Then Denver. Then the highway project outside El Paso, where 300 workers had been on schedule to pour a major foundation section. Trucks lined the fence lines at site after site. Crews sat in their cabs. Equipment sat still. Cranes were frozen against blue skies. A journalist in Phoenix got aerial footage of 3 idle job sites in the same afternoon. A union representative in Colorado gave a short interview on the steps of a state labor office and used the phrase reckless disregard for worker welfare without being asked a second question. By 3 o'clock, Southwest Building Materials was on the local news in 2 states. Inside the office, Ashley had locked herself in the conference room. I learned this from Eddie, who had started sending me quiet updates out of loyalty that had nothing to do with his job description. The first message said she is still trying to fix it. The second said she ran the calculations again. Now some people are getting paid twice and some are in the negatives. The third said she just deleted the original data file trying to reload a backup. There is no backup. I read that last one twice. She had deleted the original payroll data, the only known complete data file for the current pay period. Gone. I set my phone face down on the table and poured another bourbon. Inside the office, Andrew was apparently walking in circles and asking IT staff questions they could not answer. Patricia had retreated to her office with the door closed. The CIO had been reached by phone and was apparently driving in from a weekend trip. Legal was involved. The bank had been called and given an update that probably gave their compliance officer a headache that would last until Tuesday. And Ashley was sitting in the conference room, staring at a spreadsheet that had, by that point, produced more unique forms of financial chaos than most companies see in a decade. At 4:15, Andrew called me. He sounded like a man who had just lost a fist fight with a fact. "Brian," he said, "we need you back. Consulting basis. Name your price. I looked out my window at the desert, which was doing exactly what it always did, which was sit there in the afternoon heat and not care one way or another. I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about the 8 years. I thought about the quiet satisfaction of work done right. I thought about the workers sitting in their trucks, waiting for a company full of expensive decisions to do one thing they had always been able to count on. $15,000 up front. I said, new contract at double my old salary. I report directly to the CIO, not to Andrew. And before I touch one line of code, you and Ashley publish a written apology company-wide. Not a vague statement. An actual acknowledgement that this happened because a working system was replaced with an untested model that no one properly validated. There was a long silence. Not the silence of someone considering. The silence of someone who has already agreed and is only deciding whether to say so with dignity or without. Agreed, Andrew said. Wednesday morning, I pulled into the parking lot just after 6. The crews were still there. Some had gone home Tuesday night, but many had come back. A few trucks had been there since Friday, parked along the fence like a quiet statement. Jim Patterson was standing by the main gate with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who has learned to measure trust by actions rather than words. He saw me climb out of my truck and nodded. "Tell me you are here to fix it," he said. "Already started." I told him. The server room felt like coming home after a long trip. Same hum. Same cool air. Same cables running in the same paths I had mapped and maintained for 8 years. The difference was the mess Ashley had left in the systems that connected to it. The original payroll data was gone, which is as serious as it sounds. But I had built this infrastructure with the understanding that people make mistakes and systems eventually fail, which is why I had spent years creating archived transaction logs, redundant validation records, and an offline backup system that ran on a separate server that no one except me knew how to access, because I had documented it in a folder labeled Legacy Maintenance Notes that no executive had ever bothered to read. That folder had just become the most valuable document in the building. I started pulling records at 6:15. By 8 o'clock, I had reconstructed the complete employee time data for the pay period from transaction logs and verified it against the validation archives. By 10 o'clock, I had every wage classification confirmed and cross-referenced against the correct state and county databases. By noon, I had run the tax calculations through the actual payroll system, not Ashley's spreadsheet, and produced a clean file. By 3 in the afternoon, I had processed the union reviews, the federal contract flags, the hazard pay triggers, and the overtime tiers for all 47 active job sites. By midnight Wednesday, I had a verified, clean, complete payroll file ready for transmission. I ran it one more time just to be certain. Then I went home, slept for 6 hours, came back, and ran it a third time. Thursday morning at exactly 6 o'clock, I transmitted the file to the bank. It cleared on the first attempt. By Friday morning, 12,000 workers across Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado had the money they had earned sitting in their accounts. Correct pay, full overtime, back pay for the days they had waited. Every dollar accounted for, every classification right, every deduction accurate. My phone started buzzing again. But this time, the messages were different. Kevin Martinez, it is all here. Everything looks right. Thank you. Danny Walsh, just confirmed. Thank you, Brian. Seriously. The foreman from El Paso sent a voice memo. He did not say much. He just said it was right, and he appreciated it, and his crew appreciated it. That was enough. I was in my new office, the corner one overlooking the equipment yard. When Andrew knocked and came in, he looked like a man who had spent a week being measured against reality and had come out of it smaller than he went in. Not a bad man, necessarily. Just a man who had confused authority with expertise and was only now beginning to understand the difference. "Brian," he said, "thank you." I looked out the window at the yard, where trucks were moving and cranes were lifting, and a company of 12,000 people had returned to the business of building things that last. Thank the workers. I said. They are the ones who waited. He did not have a response for that. The written apology went out to the company before the end of the day. It acknowledged, in plain language, that a transition to an unvalidated system had caused a payroll failure that affected every employee in the organization. It used clear words: our error, our responsibility, our commitment to prevent this from happening again. Ashley was reassigned to marketing research. The official memo used the phrase, better aligned with her strategic strengths. Everyone understood what that meant. No one said otherwise, because there was nothing to say. She had been handed something she was not ready for by someone who should have known better. And the people who paid the price were the ones who had no say in the decision. The least the company could do was make sure it never happened again. Patricia brought my new contract in a blue folder. A small moment of formality that felt strangely meaningful. Double my previous salary. Direct reporting line to the CIO. Full authority over payroll infrastructure. And one new policy. Written in language that could not be walked back. No system affecting employee compensation could be replaced or substantially modified without technical review. Parallel testing against live data. Verified backups. And sign-off from qualified payroll infrastructure staff. That last line was the one that mattered most to me. Not the money, not the office, not the apology. The guarantee that the next time someone walked in with an iPad and a confident smile and a color-coded solution to a problem they did not understand, there would be a wall in the way. A wall built from the kind of experience that cannot be downloaded, cannot be lookup tabled, and cannot be replaced by anything that fits neatly in a spreadsheet. I sat alone in my office that afternoon and looked out at the yard. Equipment moving. Workers back on their sites. The familiar low roar of a company returning to what it was built to do. I opened my desk drawer and took out my old coffee mug. The one that said, World's okayest database administrator in faded letters on the side. I poured a small measure of bourbon into it and held it up toward the window. The way you raise a glass to something that cost more than it should have but finally came out right. Because here is what I want you to take from this story. Experience is not glamorous. It does not come with a presentation. It does not photograph well. It sits in server rooms at 2 in the morning and traces corrupted county codes through 3 different systems, while knowing that on the other side of the problem, there is a young concrete worker who needs the court to see his child. Support cleared by Tuesday. That is what experience looks like. And arrogance is not always loud. Sometimes it is very polished and well-dressed and confident, and it comes in carrying an iPad. Sometimes it walks into a building that runs on 8 years of accumulated judgment and sees nothing but an outdated cost center waiting to be optimized. The system always reveals the truth. Not in presentations. Not in quarterly reviews. Not in meetings where everyone is nodding at slides. On Payroll Friday, when 12,000 families open their accounts and find out whether the people responsible for this company actually understood what they were responsible for. That Friday, they found out. And some lessons, no matter how expensive they are, cannot be taught any other way. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Would you have done what Brian did? Stayed quiet, documented everything, and let the truth show itself? Or would you have fought back before it reached that point? Tell me what you would have done. And if you believe that arrogance always meets reality eventually, and that experience always finds its way back to the table. Subscribe to Alex's Revenge. We bring you real stories every week about betrayal, karma, and the kind of justice that is slow, patient, and absolutely devastating. We will see you in the next one.